So, good day and welcome to our latest travel panel episode where we take you on a virtual tour to some of the world's great wine regions around the world. My name is Stephen. I'm an instructional designer here at Napa Valley Wine Academy, and I'll be your host today as we take a dive into traveling through Tokai. Now, unfortunately, I've never been to Tokai. So joining me, we have three students of wine who have. Just below me, we have Manju, who is based in North Carolina. She is a WSET Level 3 graduate, and she's partway through her diploma. She's also in the process of starting her own wine store in Mount Airy, North Carolina. Mount Airy, perfect. Beside Manju, we have Ali. She lives in San Francisco, where she's an executive assistant for a venture capitalist firm. They do some cool stuff. They deal with like Pirates Booty, Sunbum, and the one that I'm interested in, Stone Brewery. She has a WSET Level 2, but she spends a lot of time learning through travel, which I can definitely get behind. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you.
And at the top, just above Ali, we have Csilla Kato, who is one of our lead instructors here at Napa Valley Wine Academy. She is a winemaker by trade and has worked at places like Schramsberg and Beringer. She is also Hungarian, which goes very helpful with what we're talking about today. She's actually the expert when we travel to Hungary, and she leads our trips. Csilla, it's always a pleasure. Welcome.
Oh, fantastic to be here.
Fantastic. So let's get started then. So if we're getting to Tokai, we're going to have to get to Europe to get there. Manju, you're based on the East Coast. How did you go about getting to Tokai?
Okay, so you could go from, I live in North Carolina, so I had a direct from Charlotte to London to Budapest. You could take New York, Washington, either of those locations have direct to Europe, to London, and then you'll have to take, or France for that matter, and then you can go to Budapest. You hop on to Budapest from there.
Okay, so it's fairly straightforward. Now, Ali, you're on the West Coast. Is it? How did you get there?
I had a little bit more of a unique route. I had the luxury of being able to spend some time in Croatia before. So thankfully, before this trip, I was already in Europe. But my route was San Francisco to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Dubrovnik. And then after my time in Croatia, I actually took a bus from Dubrovnik all the way to Vienna, Austria, which that's what one thing I did learn is that there was no just direct bus to Budapest. So I did spend a little bit of a layover day in Vienna and then was able to take a very easy 2-hour, I think it was less than 2-hour bus from Vienna to Budapest, which was kind of a great experience to see a lot of the countryside too. So I had a different route, I guess.
That's interesting because most people, they go away on a trip and they sort of go directly there. So you spend a little bit of time doing your own thing. How was the buses there? Like, was it like a conventional Greyhound or, did it take a long time?
Yeah, I would say the buses were pretty on time. I will say like the timings of the buses were pretty flexible. Like I would say, there was a bus departure 1 to 2 hours. So you were never, it never felt like you could, you were missing the last one for the day. The buses were very clean, and the most important part, air conditioned. So it was, especially in summer, it was definitely a great time to just kind of sit back in the AC and kind of stare out the window. So can recommend.
Yeah, excellent. I love the idea of doing a little bit of your own travel ahead of the important wine study stuff that you're going to be doing. Once we are ready, Budapest seems to be sort of the central place. Csilla, is it far to get to Tokai from Budapest?
It's not that far. I mean, by car or by bus or even by train, you're looking at about a 3-hour trip. It's, a pleasant area to drive through. There's a lot of hills along the way. And especially if you go by bus and car, there's a couple of cities that stop by as well. But it's not particularly far. Hungary is a fairly small country overall. From Budapest to Tokai, you have a highway that you can take. So it's super fast. And it's only the last about 20 miles that you're off the highway getting into the town of Tokai.
Okay, then. I've got another map up here, and so it looks to me that Hungary is, for the most part, fairly flat. Although there's some sort of mountains up in the north there, up along the Slovakian border. Can you tell me a little about the topography of Tokai, and then the climate and things as a result of that?
Yeah, so essentially, when it comes to Hungary, of course, it lays mostly in the Carpathian Basin. So the Carpathian Mountains kind of surround it from the neighboring countries. And Tokaj and the parts of those hilly areas that you see in the northeast of Hungary are basically foothills of the Carpathians. And Tokaj specifically is very much kind of in the corner there, as you can see against Slovakia. So you have this kind of very protruding range of foothills that reach out, and Tokai essentially lies in the southeastern side of these slopes. The other important thing that you have that flat area that you can see at the bottom. There is a major river called the Tisa that runs through it. And the additional picture here that actually shows that the Tisa runs by the town of Tokaj. And the other river that runs along the vines themselves, the vineyards themselves, is the Bodrog River. And right at the town of Tokaj, which has always been a very important seat for noblemen, because essentially Bodrog runs into it, so it's the confluence of two rivers. And this is also the part where the Tisa can be crossed the easiest. So especially when you have to move, armies or supplies across, this has been a very important city for trading even before wines took center stage.
Okay, so I know that the rivers cause a lot of humidity, which is really important for a lot of the conditions there. Manju, I believe you went on some kind of hike, and you were quite taken with the humidity when you were there.
Correct me, Sheila. Was it it's a powerhouse that I was up on a mountain that I went on a hike for, and it was a couple miles, but it was a beautiful, absolutely. If you're a hiker or a runner, it's a must do. There's a huge Jesus Christ statue, and then you keep going up and you reach this power station right on top. And it's absolutely a fantastic view and a beautiful, beautiful hike. But I was pleasantly surprised with the humidity that the region had. It was quite humid, but it was absolutely a gorgeous sight. But also, I want
Yes.
to point out one thing. When we were there, if you remember, the Russian Ukraine war had started. And if you notice, Ukraine is so close to Tokai, but
Hmm.
it made no impact because it was as peaceful, as quiet. Because people can think, oh, we're so close to Ukraine. Is it safe? It was absolutely safe to go. We felt no impact of anything. It was just, I'm like, I asked Sheila once, I'm like, I cannot believe you're so close to Ukraine. But, it doesn't feel that there was a war going on next door.
No, no, no. Thankfully, you cannot tell. Not just in Tokai, but the majority of Hungary. I mean, obviously, at the beginning there was an influx of immigration from the Ukraine. People were escaping the war, but other than that, there's no marks really. And getting back to your hike, so the funny thing is that you were pretty much the only one who did any kind of exercising. Most people were just sleeping in as as much as they possibly could before the day's programs. But yeah, so right behind where we were staying, there's a short little walk that you could do to a little statue, and that was something that I could see possibly people saying, so I recommended it. But Manju went way past that at the very top of the hill of Tokai, and right at the top there is it's a transfer station. It's like a
It's a
giant
transfer.
antenna that's there, but it's really cool hike, and it's very wooded up there. It's too high for the grapes, so you don't see grapes up there. It's essentially a forest, but it's quite a nice hike. And yeah, even in the morning, it tends to get kind of warm and humid for sure, especially in the summer and then the fall also. You have essentially that humidity and fog kind of coming off the rivers, and that provides that important condition that, of course, is necessary for botrytis. But as long as you can, handle that, you can do beautiful hikes as well. And it's
Yeah.
actually really amazing to see when you're at that high point how the clouds kind of sit in the valley, and then as they kind of break up during the later morning hours. If you have the chance to kind of see that, it's quite amazing.
It was. Another thing is that from that mountaintop, you actually can see the whole wine region of Tokai. You can
Hmm.
see every wine
Absolutely.
from the top, and it was absolutely breathtaking. It was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean,
And
if you look at the map where you were, oh, sorry. If you look at the map where we were, is exactly right at the bottom. You see the town of Tokaj, and then you see this like green spot surrounded by the yellow. So the yellow are the vineyards, and the green spot is the forest. So Manju was right on top of that, right in the middle. And then if you look north, you can essentially see all the hillsides and the vineyards.
I think it does speak to the humidity. I mean, sometimes people on the West Coast complain about humidity, and we're like, yeah, 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 okay. But then, you know, uh, Manju's on the East Coast, which does get legitimate humidity. And I know you spent a lot of time in India, which again, very humid. So for you to basically say, yep, this place is certainly humid, is a sign of just the humidity levels and really how it's the uniqueness that you get there and the conditions that they have for the wines that they produce. Um, moving
but the
forward,
difference is that with the humidity there, I get to drink the best azu and the best sweetest wine ever, good rice
That's
wine, which
right.
I don't get to drink on the East Coast or in India. So there it
very
is.
true.
Very true.
So we've got some images here, so you can sort of see there is a bit of topography in the background there. And then you've got the beautiful vines and things. I know, Ali, you were sort of struck with some of the biodynamics that you saw there, but also you noticed the vines are a little different to what you'd seen before. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, Sheila, you'll have to help me remember the proper term, but I had never seen vines wrapped around a post before until
Hmm.
coming to Hungary. I live fairly close, like Sheila, next to Sonoma and Napa, and so I'd never seen this style of um, a vine growth before, and just found it very interesting. And I guess it's been around for a lot longer than a lot of other conventional methods. So I found that
Yes,
very
absolutely. I mean,
fascinating.
yeah, in a way, it's almost like untrellised because there's no wires, there's no structure. I mean, each of them have a pole to hold on to, sometimes two. But yeah, it's essentially a type of bush training, but it's much more compact than the bush training that you can see here. Let's say if you look at old Zinfandel vines or other parts of the world where they make these little trees, these are very, very compact, and they planted close proximity also. This is not something that you can do any kind of mechanization, obviously. So it's all hand tended the entire season, all the way to harvest, of course.
Excellent. So moving
Yep.
on, there's a lot of volcanic soil in Tokai. Chilla, can you speak to how that affects the grapes and then consequently the wines and things?
Right. And then that picture that you can see there actually was taken on the terrace of the Sepsi winery. And they had collected a number of different rocks that are very obviously very different color, very different porosity. So you can find obsidian, you can find andesite, you can find rhyolite, you can find this rhyolite tuff, which is a very porous material. There's a lot of mixture, of course, with humus as well. So some of these are more generous when it comes to the nutrient and water holding capability. Others are very, very free draining. But overall, it adds a lot of structure, a lot of acid, and a lot of minerality to the wines. Especially the dries are very expressive on the minerality. When it comes to the acidity, of course, that runs through every wine of the region. And then the additional huge benefit of this type of volcanic base soil that you can create these amazing cellars on the ground that have been there for centuries, and some of them are many, many miles in length. As a matter of fact, you feel like you get lost, which is, as long as you have vines around, it's not that big of a problem. But you certainly are feeling you're a little bit in a wonderland because these cellars just keep opening up to new shades and new little areas. And sometimes they store bottles in them. Sometimes they have the barrels obviously aging. Um, but it's definitely something that's very important for the style of the wine, the storage, the ability to age the wines underground is very important.
Manju, I know that you were impressed, particularly impressed, with the cellars. I think it's great that they've been able to just create all these cellars, but you were particularly impressed at the, you know, please, apologies for the pronunciation, Elizabeth winery.
Yeah,
Could you tell me about
Elizabeth.
that?
Elizabeth,
Well,
yes.
yeah, Elizabeth. What was interesting to me is, of course, the winemaker and the wine grower. Both of them were fascinating people. But the most amazing thing about that winery was the cellar was dug. It, well, they did have wine supplied during the Elizabeth times to Russia, the Russian what do you say, monarchy. But of course, that history is very intriguing because I love history, and that's one thing does Tokai bring in is a lot of history. How they were one of the best regions, and then how the whole war changed the whole environment of Tokai. How socialism, or I shouldn't bring in socialism, but how you know. The Russian Revolution. I mean, the Russian, after the World War II, how that changed, and so how now you do not have really old wines, but you do have old, very old wine cellars and these caves. So the interesting thing about Elizabeth was these caves, these wine caves, were dug under the mountain, and it was absolutely fantastic. And you could literally touch the walls of these mountain, like you could scrape off these sand from these mountains right under, because the cellars were all under the mountain and they were all dug under the mountain. It was a sight to watch. And of course we had a lot of friendly crawlers there of I'm sure there were a lot of moles, a lot of spiders, so we had a lot of friendly friends out there too living.
Now, Ali, I know that you were impressed with the, I suppose, the intentionality of these cellars, along with the mold. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you're diving into the education side of wine, it's very known that environment matters, right? And so, of course, where you're storing and letting the wine do its thing is also very important. But I was so taken back by the amount of mold in a pleasant way, because obviously, for hundreds of years, this growth has been helping in a lot of ways protect and help cure the wine to make it what it is. And so it is, I mean, that's a great picture of the barrel too, of with all the mold
Yeah.
on it. I remember that one. But just something so unique that I feel like we don't get here in the States, or at least that I have never witnessed. Very cool.
No, this type of mold that you find in Tokai is very unique in a way. It's it's not the type of mold that you have to worry about, as you mentioned. As a matter of fact, it thrives from essentially the evaporation of the wine. But what it also does, it creates the right amount of humidity. It's very, very interesting in science. But if the humidity is too high, they essentially act like a sponge and pick up on it. If it's low, they actually release humidity back into the air. So they move like a mini air conditioning unit for the cellar.
That's so cool. That's really that's amazing. I've come across a mold before in cellars, but nothing like this. Like these photos, it's thick. Like you could
Yeah, the
grab
pictures
handfuls
don't
of
do
it.
it justice.
No, this don't do justice for sure.
Yeah, I love how this.
You go with
It's
this
not just.
mindset, right? Mold is bad, because you can, mold here is bad, and you can have health problems. And then you go with this mindset, and you completely see a different side of mold and appreciate mold. It's like
Yes.
mushrooms, you appreciate mushrooms when you eat a good mushroom. But when you talk about a fungi growing under the ground, you have a different idea about it.
That's true. That's very true.
Awesome. So I've already demonstrated the language is not necessarily an easy one. Um, Chilla, you're probably gonna have to correct me more than once today, but you've got Tokai and then you've got Tokai. How do you navigate the language there?
Yes. So the language of Hungary, of course, is very overwhelming, let's just put it this way, and challenging for most English speakers. It is not related to English whatsoever. The closest language to it is Finnish, which kind of tells you how difficult it is. But when it comes to Tokai specifically, in many English literature and texts, you see it with a Y. So Tokai, but that actually is just an English pronunciation for it. The proper spelling is with a J, of course. And essentially, the region and the town is called Tokai. And then you see the I afterwards because it means from Tokai in Hungarian. So any city, any place, you put an I behind it, it means from that place. So that's why Tokai and Tokai is how you say it properly. Essentially is what you see on the labels. So Tokai Asu, like the label you see on the top, is essentially the botrytis influenced wine that is very specific to this region. And then you switch to the next picture. So that gives you even more of a tongue twister for sure. I wonder if Manju and Ali still remembers how to say it exactly. You guys remember?
It's the only word I remember.
Nice. That's an important one.
Yes.
Egishegadra.
Very good. Yeah, egishegadra. Very good. That means, of course, to your health, but this is what we say instead of cheers. So that's why when we were on our welcome dinner at this little wine cellar that has, of course, wines from all over Hungary, this was in Budapest, they have it on the wall. So everyone who comes in there gets to practice a little bit.
I know one more word, kasanum.
Köszönöm, there you go. That means welcome. Excellent.
Ali and Manju, I mean, you don't speak much Hungarian. I know a few wine terms. How did you go when you were there? I know you did have Csilla to sort of help you with things, but getting there and traveling around by yourselves, was language a big barrier?
No, I think English, everybody kind of, speaks English. I didn't have any issues for sure.
Yeah, neither did
I
I.
had,
I felt,
yeah.
go ahead, Manju, sorry.
No, I said I had to get some currency exchange too in this local store, and I really didn't have any problems. Absolutely.
Oh, it's good to know then. Okay. Right, so let's chat about the grapes for a bit. Csilla, can you just give us a quick rundown of I suppose, the primary grapes of Tokai?
Yeah, so in Tokai, the only grapes that are allowed are all white. If you grow red, you cannot use Tokai. And after the phylloxera, they essentially whittled down the best grapes that are suited for the region. So the first one on the left, Furmint, is about 2/3 of the plantings. That's going to be the base for most Asu and dry wines as well. The second most important is Haslevelű, which is essentially means linden leaf. So the shape of the leaf is reminding you of the linden tree. But that one is a little bit more of an aromatic variety. Furmint has aromas as well, but a little bit more subtle. Harsh level is a little bit more outgoing, a little bit more intense. And then on the bottom, you have Sárga Muskotáj, which is yellow muscat. And of course, as you know, muscat is even more floral, even more intense than the previous two. And then Zeta finally is something that is planted in very, very small percentage. It's more considered a little bit of an experimental grape still. It's the youngest of all of these varieties as far as the region is concerned.
Manju, I know you were impressed with a few grapes, but in particular the Furmint and Sárga Muscatel. Did I say it right?
Muskotáj, yeah,
Muscatel.
Muskotáj.
Yeah, Manju, why did those grapes grab you? As you would.
The ferment, of course, because the ferment, in terms of its acidity, got my attention. But and they have, so we, every winery and from the day we landed to Hungary till the day we left Hungary, we've had ferment in multiple places, multiple vineyards, multiple wineries, and every ferment absolutely brought in its own little element to it, whether it was minerality, whether it was the acidity, whether it was the citrus flavor in it. But they were all absolutely fantastic, but they all had different elements and different spin to it. And ferment especially kind of, okay, we go at 9:30, 10 o'clock, have our first sip, and it like wakes you up with its acidity. It was fantastic. And it also had like some places it also had a finish, like a salty finish to it. So it just, you know how it is, like lime with salt. It was just perfect. And Serga muscata is very aromatic, and I do love aromatic varieties. And I think they make one of the best azus, the sweeter wines, and even the smardonis. Am I telling it right, Chila? Smardoni?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Samorodni. Yep.
Samarodni are fantastic with those varietals.
Sounds wonderful. Ali, I know that you also enjoyed the white grapes, but there were some red grapes that you also enjoyed as well.
I was. I mean, I was looking at some of the ones that I had kind of starred, and I remember starring a Cab Franc, which I was impressed that Hungary even had. And there's a couple other varieties that I would not do justice in pronouncing, but I think just something that was enlightening for me on this trip was that, I mean, I know, obviously Tokai and Ferment and Harsh-Levelou, a lot of white variety grapes are kind of like, the huge draw to the area, but we tasted quite a bit of sparkling. We had some pet nats, we had some sparkling varieties, and along with that, some great reds. So I truly believe that a lot of intervention and just experimentation is happening in this very undervalued market of what people think might just be a white wine region. So some very exciting stuff. I wish I could remember how to pronounce the exact name. So something for everyone, absolutely.
I will add here that we also tasted, and Sheila, correct me, we also tasted something called the Keck Frankish, which is like the Blau Frankish that we see in
Yes.
Austria.
Yeah,
And
so Blaufränkisch in Austria, it's called Cake Francosch in
Cake,
Hungarian. But yes, we had a few of those the first
we
night and
had,
then afterwards as well.
yes, but what was the difference is that the Austrian Blau Frankish and the Keck Frankish had completely different flavors. And when I say that, there was a little bit of correct me, Sheila, again, I felt there was a lot of red fruits in it. There was also some menthol kind of a little flavor in it. It was a medium alcohol, a medium acid. Oh, I would say acid was slightly higher on it, and I mean a great finish to the wine. So it was a
Yeah,
very pleasant Blau Frankish to me, the Hungarian Kek Frankish, which is a
yeah,
red
Cake
variety.
Francosch is definitely a variety that can show many different faces as well. But generally speaking, it's going to be medium tannin, so it's usually more easy drinking. The alcohol tends to be moderate as well. And then the acidity, yeah, medium to high, but the fruit character definitely varies. You can have red fruit, very blue, purpley fruit, and then some are the more serious ones will go into something that's a little bit more structured and a little bit darker fruit. So there's definitely a range even within just that variety in Hungary.
So I think it's interesting then that we've got traditional, the white grapes, but then, we've got some international varieties being grown as well, particularly some red varieties. Are we going to see, red wines with Tokai on the label, Chilla?
No, so in Tokai, the red varieties are not permitted at all, even though people do grow them. But if they actually bottle them commercially, then they have to be just Hungarian wines, or they just sometimes come up with like fantasy names for them, but they cannot say Tokai on the label.
Okay, that's fair enough. Before we move on, there's that strip of grapes right through the middle there. Chilla, could you tell me what's happening there?
So that is essentially what you see in the vineyard. Of course, you're going, from the first berry to the last, sometimes a week, sometimes 3 weeks passes, but it essentially shows the process of botrytis attacking a healthy berry and then slowly taking over. Botrytis, of course, is the noble rot. Botrytis cinerea is the Latin name. And this is a noble rod that attacks healthy berries and then thrives on the skin, pierces the skin of the grapes, and changes the acidity along, allowing water to evaporate. So it is essentially a type of raisin, but it's a very special type. So when you see from the beginning, you essentially have a nice plump round berry. And then as the botrytis impacts it, it gets shrink to the point where it's called an osu berry at the very bottom there. And as you would imagine, the amount of liquid, the amount of actual juice that you can gain out of these berries is minuscule. But that minuscule amount of juice, beyond just being much less obviously than what you start with, is also extremely different in quality. So you're concentrating the sugars, you're changing the acids, and then you're concentrating the aromas and the flavors as well. So you get something that essentially is nature's way of elevating intensity, elevating the concentration of the overall juice, and then of course the resulting wine as well.
So I know we've spoken a little bit about dry wines, and I think for a lot of people they think Tokai is just sweet wines, but they do a lot of dry wines. Ali, what was your experience like with the dry wines of Tokai?
I mean, if you like high acid with minerality, well, I mean, just I can't echo enough. Something for everyone. Was completely taken back by just the different variations and flexibility of what these dry wines could offer. I do think a lot of people think you're just going to have sweet from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and that was absolutely not the case. These wines offer great versatility, and also just for the value. I mean, I can't speak enough to it.
And then Manju, I know you're a fan of high acid wines.
I
Tell me
do.
your experience with the dry wines of Tokai.
Okay, so I will tell you this. It just occurred to me while Ali was talking. Is when you go to Tokai and you go for wine tasting and say there is no food, you can have a whole meal of 7 course of wine. When I say that, you can start with that absolutely nice acid, low acid, or medium acid. There's never a low acid in Tokai, but good acid wine, and then it can build into structure, go into a little more higher acid, go into a little more body structure with some of the reds, and then you end with a dessert. But the I loved the acidity of these wines, especially ferment. I really enjoyed it. I love how it balances with acid, the minerality, and there's a fruit flavor to it. It was not just hitting on the acid. It was just very well balanced. You could feel like if France talk about terroir, now Hungary also has terroir. So I will say that it brings in the whole package with these wines, but it's also having a whole course meal. Truthfully, with the wine alone you can have meal, because it starts with a really light and ends up with a sweet in Tokai. Every tasting was like that. You start and then you always end up with the tasting, and like, okay, this is like a full course meal.
Nobody goes hungry in Hungary.
No, no.
Very good point.
Yes.
We'll cover the food before we finish today. Moving along out, we've started in the corner there. We've got the dry wines. Csilla, can you tell us a little about late harvest? Is that botricized grapes? What's happening there?
So when it comes to late harvest in Tokai, it does have a little bit of a different meaning. So just because something is late harvest, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have sweetness. Some of them can be dry or off dry. Some of them can be quite sweet as well. But essentially, you start with the healthy berry, and then it's going to, of course, make a dry base wine for you, which may be, bottled as it is, or maybe used as a base wine for creating the asu. And then as you go into late harvest, as you can see, first you get just like a regular shrivel, and you may see just a little hint of botrytis in these wines, but sometimes they can be bone dry. And even when you get to the samorodni level, which is essentially kind of the middle row here and then going into the bottom row. So samorodni actually means as it comes or as it picked. So for samorodni, they pick a variety of different ripeness level berries. So some of them may be even kind of like round and plump, and then others going to have more botrytis on it, and the others going to be in the middle. So samorodni is always going to be a mixture of the fresh fruit and then the more botrytis influenced fruit characters. And while it can be sweet, it also can be dry. So you either have dry samorodni or sweet samorodni. And it really depends on obviously how much of the healthy berries are in there. But those can be very, very complex wines. In the past, they also were quite oxidized during the aging process. Samorodni was introduced to a good amount of air. It's not really the case anymore. They make it in a much fresher, more protective style, so those beautiful fruit characters can shine. Before, in the 80s and the 90s, you had Samorodni that was almost a little bit like a sherry in a way, not fortified, but the oxidative notes. That's certainly not the case anymore. So Samorodni has much more freshness. And then same with the Osu. Like if you look at the WSET book of old, they're going to call Osu technically being an amber color, which is certainly not the case. A lot more of them are more gold, not amber, because they watch for the oxidation throughout the whole winemaking process. And when it comes to Osu, of course, you're always going to have sweet wines. The Osu is always going to be dessert level sweetness. But another change that happened about 10 years ago when it comes to the legality, the way the sweetness level of the finished osu is expressed is in puttonyos. And puttony essentially is an old school picking basket that used to be a measurement for how many osu berries, how much weight of osu berries were utilized to make the wine. And obviously, the higher that number is, the sweeter the finished wine is. And in the past, the range was from 3 to 6. So 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 and 4 is not a legal term anymore, so you don't see that on labels. Before 10 years prior, you see those older bottles possibly still around, but now only 5 and 6 are permitted. So those will be the sweetest levels of the Asu. And then below that, you can call it late harvest. There's a few, obviously, somewhere a few other ways to talk about the sweetness levels, but 5 and 6 Puttonyos Asu is the only thing that is allowed to be bottled now. And if you go sweeter than the 6 Puttonyos Asu, that's when you get into the world of Ascents, which is a whole different ballgame altogether.
Manju, I know that you'd read about Saporodny before, but it was a real eye-opener when you actually got to get in and try them, because there's a whole range of different ones you got to try. Can you speak to why it was an eye-opening experience?
Sure, because when I read about Hungarian wine, firstly, level 3, I want to say it's only a 3 page. I mean, not necessarily. People can read other things on the net, but I'm telling from where I went was I read a 3 page, text about Hungarian wines, and then Zamarodny was maybe a para, Essentia was 2 lines, and Azu maybe another para or so. But when I went and you read this, but you can't really put it together about how exactly these wines are made. So when my trip to this Hungary and Tokai was an eye opening for me, because the the what should this the how varied they are, and how wonderful these grapes can talk to you, in the sense of where it comes, which winery it comes, what they do, how they have mixed up, like what Csilla just mentioned. It could be not at all shriveled Zamrodny. It could be a little bit late harvest Zamrodny, but also could have a mixed berry, and the complexity of those wines. But the one thing that you always think is, when it is a late harvest, it would lose its acidity. But then there is this refreshing acidity in these wines. So those are the things that you really cannot understand with the text, and you don't feel, okay, this is what the wine can bring you. And when you go to Hungary, a place like Tokai, and you taste them, it was an absolutely mind-boggling, eye-opening experience for me.
Excellent. And then Ali, I know that you really enjoyed the late harvest stuff, and you thought it's very different to the late harvest you'd had in the US. But it was the Samorodny, which was your pun intended sweet spot. Can you speak to that to me?
I mean, Manju definitely spoke to this, but I think just knowing that, somebody picked a whole cluster of grapes with some shriveled up on it and decided to turn that into a wine, whether it was, earlier in the season, middle of the season, late season. It's just so eye-opening to speak to Manju's point a little bit, to see like what, a week's time could make in a difference, of what the acidity and also the level of sweetness can be produced in these wines. I mean, the Samarani, in my opinion, was just like the home run of the experience, because you had some that were, nice and sweet, and then you had some that were just like little sweet. I mean, you just didn't know what you were going to get, and I think every time you were always surprised. And it was, in looking at the text of the specific wine, it's really fascinating to see the flexibility of what these winemakers are doing, and even adopting this style of a whole cluster and seeing what happens. It's awesome.
But
That's
you
good.
can never taste that today here. I mean, the only place I could taste and feel it is in Tokaj in Hungary, because I don't think, as much as we talk about Zamarodni or even Azu or Essentia, I mean, I just knew that as a text. I had no idea. And in text, it says it is like honey, the consistency. But you can never put it together in your mind about really how it tastes. And when you taste it, you know what they're talking about. We were licking Essentia. We never sipped it. We were literally licking with our tongue because we didn't want
Yes,
it to
we
be.
were.
Oh, yes.
And I'll just put this slide up here. This is, we alluded to it, but it deserves its own slide though. The Essentia, Chilla, why is it special?
So when it comes to Essentia, remember those pictures of the tiny, tiny shriveled up botrytis berries? So basically, throughout harvest, they collect these berries, and then they collect it in these vats, and whatever juice comes out of those berries without any actual pressure, just because of their own weight pushing one berry on another, there's a tiny, tiny little tap at the bottom of these vats, and they collect the juice that's 100% botrytis influenced juice, and it's so thick and it's so rich, and the amount that you get out of those berries is so minuscule that it's treated completely different. As a matter of fact, in the Middle Ages, it was considered medicine, and you could buy it only in pharmacies. And even today, usually the serving size is very small. In many restaurants, you get a spoonful of this wine. But basically, the amount of sugar, the concentration of acid is so high that Essentia or Essence ferments up to 2 years. And even then, the alcohol percentage is somewhere between 3 and 5%, usually right around 4% or so, because there's such a huge amount of sugar that the yeast has a really, really hard time to get the fermentation done. So what you get essentially, in a way, it's almost not even wine. It's somewhere between juice and wine, but you get the absolute concentrated version of what botrytis does to the juice. So you get the most intense character of the honey, the dried apricot, the ginger, the rye bread, all the spices, all the fruit concentration. It's something that's extremely rich, extremely overwhelming. Like even after tasting Asus that already have a lot of concentration, a lot of amazing balance and good fruit, you taste Essentia and your mind is just like blown. Like I don't know if you guys seen Ratatouille, but there's that version of all these different things happening around the little mice's head, and the flavor compounds just create a fireworks in their brain, and that's essentially what Essentia does to you. You have almost a hard time to process of what you're experiencing because it's so concentrated and so amazing.
It's just not only has the sweetness or the concentration of flavor, but it also has the acidity to it to kind of, I mean, it's everything in there. But I remember, I think Sheila, correct me, I think it was Disnoku when we went, and they had this, and you showed it to me, and Sheila mentioned to me then that she worked harvest in Hungary long time ago, and
Yeah.
she was in charge of picking this essentia to make essentia, and she would go
Yeah.
every morning and pick this bucket, and there used to be these tiny drops into this little
Yeah.
container. And I would say, I asked her, would she put her finger and just lick it? Because I'm sure it was the most delicious thing that she would have put it on her finger. Because, am I right, Sheila? You did mention that to me, didn't you?
Yes, yeah, and it's crazy because like you have this fairly large vat that has many pounds of the asu berries collected, and the tap at the bottom is tiny, and you get at like each day I got maybe like less than a quart out of that huge vat, and that's what was collected for the essentia making throughout the harvest. It was crazy. But yeah, I mean, just the aromas that come off of it are so heady and so intense. I mean, even without tasting, you get a very good idea of how amazing they are. But yeah, you're right. So one of the things that I think sets Tokay apart, from Sauternes or from Botrytis German wines, that the acidity is fantastically balanced. Not like they don't have acidity, the other dessert wines, but in Tokai, it's definitely a notch up. Like whenever we do blind tasting, you can usually tell Tokai will have the highest acidity and the best balance, especially at the higher sweetness levels. And of course, a pure expression of the botrytis with the marmalade and the dried apricot. But yeah, the essentia here that we had actually was our first night in Tokai, and it was a bit of a surprise for everybody because I was intended to have Essentia later in our trip. But this first night in Tokai brought us the good fortune to be able to taste one, and everybody was just like enamored. That's when they were like really like, okay, now we really are here. We have arrived.
That was fantastic.
Ali, tell me about your experience. This is your first experience with Essentia.
I mean, this was, yeah, like everybody mentioned, this was our first night where we got lucky enough to get to experience it. And I think truly after the dinner tasting this wine changed my entire perspective of Tokai. I just, again, the versatility and just being there for such a short day. I mean, it's, you can see in these glasses, there's not a lot in there, but you don't need a lot to get to experience this wondrous jewel of liquid gold, which it truly is. I mean, it is something that if I hope everyone gets the chance to taste in their lifetime, because it is something like you have never had in your life. It is truly special. And I think to not start off our trip and time in Tokai, to have that kind of in the beginning even, and also like we were fortunate enough to have it, a couple times throughout. I mean, it just reinforces just how special the region is, and truly just what a treat that this particular wine is. It's amazing.
I'm very jealous. As someone with a sweet tooth who likes botrytized wines, it's something I've never had. So I look forward to the time when I do get to have some. Moving on then, Chill, I know when you talk about wineries in Tokai, you sort of talk about different approaches. So the first one you sort of talk about is traditional approaches to winemaking. Could you tell me a little about the traditional winemakers?
So the traditional winemakers, traditional wineries tend to be the larger producers, like Disnoku and Oremus, a few that we went to, and they are essentially carrying the torch of what Tokai is traditionally. As I mentioned, there's a little bit of a moving away from the oxidative approach, but overall the idea is to make the best Osu possible. And of course, they make Essentia and they make dry wines at an excellent level. But these producers are focused very heavily into making the best Osu possible. And they have the vineyard holdings that makes it also something that they can reach in pretty much every vintage, which for the smaller producers is not necessarily the luxury they have every year. Because in order to make the asu, you of course have to go out to the vineyards and do multiple passes to pick those asu berries off the clusters one by one. And it's a tremendous amount of work. When I was there for that one harvest in Tokai, That's when I really quite realized what it really means to make that happen, and how much work goes into it. And for a larger producer, that's something that's easier to accomplish, generally speaking. And then they also tend to have better resources to be able to market their wines. So you see their products generally more often on the American market.
Ali, you sort of, Csilla brought it up earlier, but the Shinoku, you sort of spoke of them as the Mondavi of Hungary. Could you tell me about your visit there?
I'm probably going to get busted for saying that, but I think for sure, just, the impact that they have had on the industry, that I'm sure I'm forgetting details, but just the entire environment gave me, similar vibes as far as just the intentionality of the architecture, the intentionality of the impact of not just the brand itself, but just on the entire industry. Fellow wineries and fellow winemakers, and everybody kind of coming together for a common purpose, not just for the money making aspect, but for just the health and wellness and the longevity of these of these wines and of this region.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Disnoco was essentially the first winery that we visited when we got to Tokai, because they kind of right along kind of like that entrance road, their main facility. So we were able to go to the vineyard, and then, as you said, the architecture of their winery is breathtaking and very much purpose built to make the best wine possible. They also were very professional, gave us a little PowerPoint presentation that gave us a very good kind of jumping overview into Tokai about the size and the soils and the botrytis. So that was fantastic. And then we had a lovely lunch on site, which was probably the first time when people were like, I can't eat everything. What do I do? Because the portions and are so generous, and the food is so filling.
Excellent. Excellent. So the second type you've spoken about is the smaller family-owned wineries. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, so we visited a number of these, like Erzsébet Pince and Szepsi would be probably two of the prime examples that comes to mind. But these are wineries that have been around only pretty much since the change of the system, so the late 80s, early 90s. And they were people that often worked at these larger producers as winemakers or viticulturalists, and they were able to either still own vineyards or purchase vineyards, and they started making their own wines based on their own ideas, which may have been just slightly different. I mean, it's not like they completely changed the game as far as how Osu is made, but they made little tweaks both in the vineyard and the winery, and they created versions of both dry and sweet wines that were an even clearer expression of what Tokai is capable of. Or they started creating single vineyard Osus, which was pretty much unheard of before. And they really also made a serious pledge about making the best quality wine possible. And if they had the vintage where the quality wasn't there, then they made very, very small amounts. So financially, these are very hard decisions to be made when your whole family's livelihood is based on this winery. But all the producers that we visited, and the majority of producers in Tokai, are very much putting the quality of the wines and the renommee of the region ahead of their financial gain, which is really amazing to see. The only way you can do that is having your heart 110% in the game, and really caring about what people think of Tokai based upon every single bottle that you're releasing, because you don't know where those bottles end up. So you might as well put the best wine in each one of them.
Manju, I know that you've already spoken about Elizabeth, which I believe is, we'd categorize as one of these, sort of family-owned smaller vineyards. You sort of spoke about the cellar system there, but also the balance of the wines really struck you. Can you speak more about your experience there?
Um, well, of course, Elizabeth was a very special place for me. I loved that vineyard because it's, you know, they were fantastic winemakers, as I said, winemakers as well as wine growers, and it was like a science for them, in the sense is the husband and wife couple, they worked with each other, and they would taste on a daily basis, and they would determine what needs to be added, what barrel or of the wine needs to be added to make this more balanced. And what was cute about that couple was also they also owned a coffee shop, which was again a beautiful coffee shop, and they said, doing making wine or have brewing coffee is the same thing. It works on the same science of flavors. So that was a good team. But also, I will say that another very pleasant and very encouraging for me from Turkey and Hungary was how many female winemakers are there, and how many of them are very conscious on organic and biodynamic. And I think one, Chila, correct me, it's Degenfeld, Pelepins, and few other women winemakers who have been phenomenal, and they have made, they're small winemakers, but they have done phenomenal job in, for the environment as well as in the whole winemaking technique. And so that was a very pleasant surprise for me from a small region like Hungary. And
Yeah.
also
So
production of sparkling and pet nuts and stuff like that.
yeah, and you mentioned organic and biodynamic, and that is something that is definitely gaining ground in Hungary in general, but Tokai as well. And we were able to visit one of the two truly biodynamic producers of the region. So the one that we went to was Solo Pinza,
So
and
yes,
yeah, the winemaker there, Tima, she is definitely one of these personalities that you just have to meet to believe,
yeah,
because she's just so caring and so gentle. And yeah, she showed us her pet nat. And then she had another sparkling wine and still wine, and then of course Asu as well, and late harvest. And we tasted all of those in the vineyard. And I remember as we were driving out with the bus, I asked the driver, "Are you sure you can make it?" And then he's like, "Yeah, yeah, we got this." And it was pretty steep. We had to climb at the very end, but essentially being among the vines and listening to her, how she made the wines, and we tasted on this tiny little patio in the midst of the vines. It
so
was amazing experience, and she did such an amazing job. She's actually not a winemaker by trade. She came from law, believe it or not, but
mhm.
she's been making fine wine for over 10 years. And from the get go, she wanted to do biodynamic growing and as hands off of a winemaking as she can. And her wines showed beautifully. So I was really lucky that we were able to see her. She doesn't do a whole lot of visits or anything like that. Because I mean, you guys see where the production is, and then we actually went back to her house to purchase the wines. I mean, it's a tiny place,
Mm.
and she does such an amazing job.
And
I was
very,
trying to
very
keep
was
Inspiring.
myself.
my wine from.
She was very inspiring, because also thing I found about her was she was very fearless. She was fearless in trying something different. She was fearless in portraying something different. She was, she wanted to bring something special to her bottle. I have to say that. So I
Yes,
really
yeah,
enjoyed her. She was interesting for sure.
yeah.
Ali, I know that Sepsi was a special winery for you. Why was that?
Yeah, I mean, I think family lineage in the industry is obviously something to be cherished in the wine industry. And I do feel that we were so lucky because along with kind of seeing, the different dimensions of Hungarian soil, which they so kindly put on display for us, but along with tasting their wines and kind of like hearing their journey as far as getting, prominent recognition, not just, of course, in Hungary, but just out there in the world, we got to see, I don't know if I'm allowed to share this, but we got to actually see, and Sheila knows his name, but the grandfather who,
Mm,
helped kind of harness and teach his kids the
Yes.
business, who originally didn't come out. And so it kind of felt like
yeah.
full circle to like hear the story and then kind of see him as we were leaving of like the generational impact of the story and the winery itself.
Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to Sepsi, he's definitely a prime example where he used to work as a viticulturalist for some of those larger wineries. And back in the 70s and the 80s, he planted a lot of the vineyards around the region at different parts. So he was able to get for kind of himself when he started his own label the best plots possible because he was just so familiar with them. And actually, his son is carrying the torch, and of course, the third generation is in training. So his son is who you see on the picture, and we are essentially in their dining room. That's where they held the tastings, and you can see their coat of arms on the wall, and then we are standing around and looking at their family tree. So they have been around for many centuries as a family in this area. And actually, if you look back at the history of making Tokaj Asu in the 1500s, the first sepsi Asu was made by one of their ancestors. So it's such a fantastic story to be able to be there and live there. You know, I don't even know 17th generation or something like that. That is still there at the region and still makes fantastic wines. I mean, their wines have been recognized globally by the Golden Mines, by many different organizations as being um, pretty much the five-star rock stars of the region.
Hmm.
And to piggyback on that, Sheila, I mean, these are things you can't read in a textbook. Like kind of to Manju's point earlier, like you cannot read about this family's story and when you're there, you're living it. Like you're living it and you're seeing, you know, like Sheila said, you're in their living room and we're looking at their family tree and just seeing like how these people, you know, truly like embody the product that they're producing. It's so special. And to the point, yeah, like you see these high star, high caliber, you know, productions, and then you never really get to know until you're there, like truly like what these people are about. It's very special.
That's excellent. It's really, really cool to have an experience like that. It's unique. It's wonderful. Chilla, very quickly, could you run us through the third approach to winemaking in the region?
So the third approach essentially is of innovation, and that was, you know, the example of bringing in biodynamics at Solo Pinza. But then we also went to another place called Pelle, and the guy who founded that winery about 15 years ago, he's an engineer, and he has a very engineering, very you know, down to earth mind. So the technical winemaking that he brought into his product created a fantastic sparkling wine. We were actually there when they were doing some bottling, and his wines are very precise, very elegant. But still speak to the area where they're coming from. So innovation is definitely something that you can see with these newer producers that come on board and create just a different facet to the region that is fantastic.
Awesome. Right, so move on quickly. So you can see here some images of Budapest, because I feel like if you're going to go to Tokaj, you really do have to stop in at Budapest at least for a couple of days. Ali, what would you suggest?
Well, when I arrived, the Formula One races were taking place. I didn't invest in the time to go, but I truly just spent the time both before the tour and after the tour, just really exploring the city. I didn't, you know, have any agenda. I did find myself at one of the bathhouses. I hiked, urban hiked through, you know, both the Buda side and the Pest side, and you know, got to explore all the food. There's a beautiful open air market that we were lucky enough during our time there to get to explore and just see all of the different you know, food items and smells and experience, you know, the cuisine in a hot and central location there. So it's truly a city worth exploring.
And then Manju, the history really was something that grabbed you.
I do. I love European history. So the whole Ottoman side of the story. I mean, how they explored Hungary and how they brought in their culture and the bathhouses. This time, when I went for my wine tasting, I did not do bathhouses, but I've been to Budapest earlier and I've done that part of it, the history side of it, and I have phenomenally enjoyed it. And of course, I love hiking around the city, so that has been great. And definitely the food um, was fantastic.
We're about to get on to the food, but Chilla, anything to add about, any must-dos in Budapest, and also other wine regions potentially that people could stop by on the way?
So when it comes to Budapest, of course, it is my hometown, so very dear to my heart. And one of the most interesting things for me, I love history, of course, and the way it manifests itself in architecture. So when it comes to Budapest, you can find anything from Roman ruins to bathhouses from Turkish times from the 14th century to Gothic, a lot of Baroque buildings. Um, Definitely many Art Deco buildings, and then all the way to modern architecture. So you really, any type of architecture you're looking for, you will find it in Budapest, and a plethora of examples of those. In addition to the architecture and of course the history and the museums, there's a lot of fantastic areas to discover. Like Budapest, as Ali mentioned, is Buda and Pest. So Pest is the side that's on the eastern side of the Danube, and that will be very flat. That's where downtown is. That's where the main basilica is, which is one of the largest churches in Eastern Europe. And then you go on to the Buda side, which is on the western side, and then you get the hills. So that's where the Buda Castle is, because of course that had to be built on a hilltop. So the picture on the top essentially looks down onto the Danube from there. And then you have the Parliament, you have the Margaret Island, which is right in between, of course, on the river. That is also a fantastic area to kind of relax. And there's just so much to explore, from the art to the museums to the restaurants. There's always something going on. There's always festivals. The markets, the one that we went to is the main market hall, but there's others, like each district within Budapest kind of has their own, where people regularly go shopping for produce and meat and spices. So those are always very lively places to explore. You often find, of course, restaurants within their little delis where you can buy a lot of different delicacies. And then if you venture outside the Budapest, which for many is something that it feels like, oh, I don't have time. I have like 3 days for Budapest. But there's so much to explore. One of my favorite areas, there's many obviously, is Lake Balaton, which is essentially on the western side of the country, and it's surrounded by wine regions itself. It's a very, very large lake, so it kind of has its own microclimate. It's very popular in the summer, but if you're there maybe off season, like in the fall, for instance, it's much more quiet. And the wineries exploring there are also fantastic. Different varieties, obviously from Toka. You see a little bit of Furmin there, but mostly other varieties. And they have some beautiful facilities, and definitely worth even just a day trip if you can swing it.
I love that all of you mentioned to me just the bath culture. I think it's the place to have a bath. Sounds great. Right, we've alluded to it for the entire panel so far. Ali, tell me about the food.
I did not have a bad meal on this trip. I think just when you think it can't get any better, it does. And it can be from, eating a nice meal at the hotel restaurant, and then we're out, I mean, the top picture comes to mind of the schnitzel falling off of the tray when we were in Mad, the
Mad,
wine
yes, yeah.
the wine region, and you just think, oh, I'm just at this roadside, little restaurant, and everything was phenomenal. I mean, again, not a bad meal in Hungary.
And then Manju, you've really enjoyed the cuisine. I think it speaks to you, but also not only that, you're impressed with things like the pickling, like nothing's wasted.
Yes, they pickle with everything. I don't think they ever waste anything. They don't waste the skin. They don't waste the seed. Like everything is being pickled, and which I think is amazing. How there's so much of nothing goes wasted. There's always use, and they use that in their meals preparation too. Like it is served on the side of the meal. There'll be a little bit of plum, there will be a little bit of watermelon, there'll be a little bit of cabbage. There's always something that's used. And so it's not just, it's in the summer. You can get those vegetables round the year because they make the best use of pickling them and storing them. Uh, but as Ali just said, the food was phenomenal. Why do you think I hiked so much? Because I have to get ready for my next meal. But I never, okay, so before I went to Hungary, I always thought goulash, that's it, that's the thing Hungarians are known for. I had no idea that they had this plethora of dishes and cuisines. It was phenomenal. The desserts, everything was just fantastic. My mouth is still watering. I can't talk without swallowing out of.
I am too. I'm hungry looking at this.
Me too. My mouth is just watering, is thinking of the food. It was fantastic.
Chilla, very quickly, could you run over some of these dishes for us? Because they're,
Yeah.
my mouth's watering.
So starting from the top on the right, that was the schnitzel with the roasted potatoes and pickled vegetables on the side. So as Manju, as it was mentioned, it was a lunch. And actually we had some broth before with vegetables and a little bit of meat, so a very light first dish. And then these came out, and they literally were so large that there was only one person in the entire group that was able to finish the whole thing, which was very impressive, let me tell you. But it was very delicious, very crisp. And then you go to the left, which is a dessert. And for that one, there was vanilla and pear, and then those little foam things were essentially made with tokai asu, and then there were some great berries there as well. Underneath that, there was duck. So we had roasted duck with vegetables, and then you also see a little bit of a potato dish underneath, and then those carrots are also pickled. So they brought in a nice little balance with the richness of the duck with a little bit of vinegar. And on the right-hand side, under the schnitzel, it's boboika, which is a type of poppy seed, kind of like almost like a bread pudding in a way, but has a lot of poppy seed in it. It's an ingredient in Hungarian pastries that is not used the same way like in Western cuisine. Like here you see like a few pieces on the top of a bagel and that's about it, or maybe just a few kind of in a poppy seed muffin. We lay it on. So when it's poppy seed, it's definitely much richer. Sometimes it's as a filling, sometimes it's a topping.
There's like a layer of poppy seeds on the top there.
Yes, that's exactly what you
so
see.
It's not like a frosting. It's just
no, that's like a poppy seed cream. So they grind the poppy seed, of course, and then they cook it up with a little bit of water and sugar. Sometimes they add milk to it as well. So it turns into kind of like a cream of poppy seed, and that's a very popular ingredient in different pastries. Sometimes again as a topping, sometimes as a filling. And then on this picture, the one I was want to talk about is what is in somebody's hand, and that's pöttyös túrórudi. So that's your Hungarian lesson for the day. The pöttyös is actually those red dots, and that essentially is something that I've eaten ever since I'm a little kid. It's a very traditional Hungarian dessert that is basically like a cheesecake filling covered in chocolate, but it's more crumbly, and there's of course no crust. So you have what you would see in a cheesecake, but a little bit more crumbly and not as sweet. It's a little bit more tart. They use lemon and lemon zest, and then there's a thin layer of chocolate on the outside. And the whole thing, you just open up the package and then you eat it with, straight out of your hand. And it's something that probably is not the most high quality cuisine, but it's such part of Hungarian culture that I just bought some at a store and brought it up on the bus and had everybody try it. They sometimes come nowadays with different fruit fillings and things like that, but the original is just the cheese and then the chocolate, thin layer of chocolate on the outside. And it's delicious. I really love it.
I definitely need to eat some food, like
like very soon.
yeah. I think just sitting here, just the mouth is literally watering.
But I also have to tell you, Sheila took us to this this place where this wonderful lady makes jams out of azu and out of different kind, the wines, the Hungarian wines. And it was really fun because we all had to pull out flavors and guess which wine went into which of these jams. But those jams were so delicious. Like I got a bunch of variety, and we kind of cleaned through that in my house. It was just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
Of
it was
this,
a fun
we had,
sensory analysis.
yes, it was like we had tomatoes, we had squash, and we had, I mean, vegetables that you can't think of, but you could never taste that vegetable, in the sense it was very pleasantly blended into this preserve or jam this she had made. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. There was a
That's
little
awesome.
surprise visit where,
It
people are
was
like,
great.
why are we coming to somebody's house? And then we walk in, and then she had everything set up, and we essentially did a blind tasting of jams.
That
So
was
that's
great.
not something that you do every day for sure. And it was really, really fun. And that's what you see actually above the pictures there, the little sample plate that she prepared for us. And that was really cool. I mean, I met her before, but I haven't done this specific tasting that she laid out for us, and it was amazing. And yeah, we left with many, many jars. I think everybody brought some home.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think just to sum it up, Tokai, an amazing range of wines, not just sweet wines, but an amazing range, very versatile. Obviously, the amazing food, and then also just a great time. I think we've sort of demonstrated that today. Like it's a cool place to visit. A big thank you to Manju and Ali for telling us about your experiences, also the photos you supplied. Also, thank you to the 2023 Napa Valley Wine Academy students who visited Hungary for their photos as well. And then finally, Csilla, thank you again for sharing your expertise, your wisdom, and your knowledge of all things Tokai. I think if you're a fan of wine and travel, then Hungary is definitely a place that you should visit. Thanks, everyone.